Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagner Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week, we'll start out with a question from a listener. This time we are going to answer the question from Assaf from Rochester. I promised it last week, and then I realized, snap, dude, I haven't recorded that yet. But we did record it on Saturday, so you'll get that question, a series of questions related to honors colleges. And then our roundtable's back. It's the last segment. Our roundtable's having a mom send in several questions. And so we just answer those questions. And then we transition to the interview that I did with Stephen Burd and Don Hossler, continuing the conversation about enrollment management and talking particularly about a couple really big companies that are the invisible hand that shapes so many decisions that are made in the field of admissions that often very few people know about. So, if you want to know how the sausage is made, it's a good interview, and it'll be part 3 of 4. And then Lisa and I pick up our college spotlight on the University of South Carolina, recounting recent visits we've had there and just a free-flowing exchange of ideas. That's a 3-parter, and this will be part 2 of 3.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Julia, the long-awaited question from Assaf from Rochester, which I teased out a week ago saying it would be on Thursday, only to realize, snap, that's the one we never recorded. So I'm going to play the question, and then I'd love to get your thoughts.
My name is Assaf from Rochester, New York, and my question is about honors colleges. If my daughter is only interested in a particular school for its honors college, but the school only admits to the honors college by invitation, 1, is there a way to indicate your interest to the school? And 2, if not, should she even consider applying? My other question is, how does one assess the competitiveness of honors colleges? How do they compare to the now pervasive metric of acceptance rates? And what will give you a true sense if your teen has a realistic chance at acceptance to the program? Thank you very much.
Well, I think this is a great question, and I often get a lot of these parts of this question about honors college in general. And I think it's important to note that actually colleges that have honors colleges, they do behave very differently than one another, not just in the application process, but once you are a student there. So I do think before you determine if you would want to pursue the honors college at a college that offers that, you do need to look into what that honors college really means. I've had at some colleges that can mean like a whole different experience. You're part of a different cohort that lives in a different dorm that's fancier. You get a lot of scholarship, you might get stipends, you might get special resources, you might get access to internships and professors and classes that other people don't. And then for some colleges, I can think of one that it's like there's like 7 seminar classes that are honors and might not even be in your major, and that's you being in the honors college. And it's like it's not even, it's like almost just like a distinction to say, but there's actually no perks that come except you can take these 7 classes that are only open to honors college students, and it might not be a class you would ever take anyways.
I thought about something and it just popped into my head because I see this all the time, right? Like, what are the benefits? Right. And they can be very robust. Linda recently did one with Barrett at at ASU. Like they've just allocated so many resources there. And you see it at other places, Schreier's at Penn State. South Carolina's got a lot of resources allocated. And you'll see like the special career counseling and the special study abroad programs and all these different things. I'm almost thinking, and maybe I'll test this out myself because I haven't done this, to start asking schools, like, what is the budget? What is the budget for the honors college? Because obviously there's a difference. By the way, friends, there's a difference between honors college and honors programs. And they're
Right.
That's very important because you're usually taking it with honors college to the point where there's a dean there. And then there's just a lot more resources allocated. And then there's other places that are doing more. What Julia's talking about is almost the marketing side. Like, let's slap the name on it, but starve it of resources. And literally, like, you're giving people maybe an extra project to do when they're just in the class with everybody else. And so you write an extra paper.
Right.
Like, that is such a different experience. And so I'm glad we should start with that. Like read the fine print of what the benefits are. And Tara Williams did bring that out in that interview really recently on Barrett. It was just ran about a month ago. Like, they are so different. So read the benefits. How many times are you only in honors only classes? And are those classes limited to a certain size? So there's a lot of things we could go on. So that's the first thing we should say. What else do you want to say about the questions? Says he asked three or four great questions.
Yeah, I think we could start with the question about how do you know if you're competitive for an honors college. And lucky for us, this actually tends to be something you can find out on your own without a college counselor. Most of the time, honors colleges are at not uber selective colleges, right? So, Harvard does not have an honors college. Now, there are some exceptions. There's some special maybe scholarship programs, but by and large, I would say like if you're admitting less than 25% of your applicants, there is not likely to be an honors college option for you.
And normally they're at bigger schools, because
also true.
Yeah, yes. Because part of the whole appeal is them competing and saying you can have your cake and eat it too here. You can get all the resources of a larger institution, but the smaller, more intimate experience of a smaller school. And that's part of why they even exist in the first place, is to compete and not lose kids to those schools.
Exactly. And so a lot of the time you might know if you're competitive for an honors college. Some of them spell it out exactly what it is. It's students who have a GPA of this. And maybe some schools do stipulate maybe what round you apply in as being the way to do the honors college. Or most honors colleges, if you do apply to the honors college, has a deadline, right? If it's not an invite, has a deadline. So obviously you have to meet that as well too. Right. But if you are very much above profile of the average admitted student, and perhaps you're not going for I'm thinking of like UIUC, and if you're not going for like computer science or engineering there, it is a very good chance that you might get the honors college because you represent maybe the top 1 to 10% of their applicants that they think you're likely to get into perhaps a more selective school that you might go to. And so they're really trying to carve out a path at their institution where you could see yourself succeeding, just as if you maybe went to one of those more selective schools. So it's a little marketing as well as to hope to woo you with the perks or with the lower price. But also to, as you just said, Mark, to kind of create that experience a student might have. Honors colleges are awfully popular at public universities, right? So to give that kind of special, more one-on-one, individualized attention. And then honestly, I don't know about you, Mark, but most of my students sometimes will only apply to less selective schools if they're going to go to the honors college, because to them, they're, like we talked about, they're still adolescents and the name matters. And so they feel a little special and extra to say like, oh, I'm going to this school, but I'm in the honors college there.
Yeah, that's definitely helped me get some people comfortable with certain schools just off that piece alone. The one thing I wanted to say, Julia, is almost all of these schools produce honors college profiles.
Yep.
So you can see the profile, and they have sections on the websites that delineate both the profile of the admitted student profile. And once again, it's going to give a range. So a lot of times you'll see it listed in its range. South Carolina's on my mind because right now on this episode, we're still doing a 3-part spotlight on South Carolina. And so and I just got back from there, but you'll see on their profile, and it has the information of, you'll see on there the test score, 25th to 75th percentile. You'll typically see a GPA. Now you have to be careful because sometimes they've recalculated it, and you have to know how they're recalculating it. Sometimes they'll indicate where people typically are in their class, like top, 2 to 4% or something, and then other ones that are not as selective, it's not way up there. So that's the first thing that I would say is try to locate the honor school profile, go to the website, look at the criteria and the standards, and, look at it from a college's standpoint. If they make this too opaque, all they're doing is creating so much more work from themselves because the receptionist line's going to blow up with people asking questions.
Right.
So it's actually in their best interest to spell it out fairly clearly, because you're just decreasing the questions that you're going to get. I mean, you're still going to get them because not everybody reads, but so most of the time I feel people are pretty clear on their communication of their profile. Now, of course, where it gets more complicated is not everybody's admitting by the numbers, right? A lot of times for honors colleges, it may be different than the school. The schools can become way more holistic all of a sudden with additional essays and everything from interviews to essays to additional recommendations. And so all those things can come into play.
Right. Or they look at how many service hours you might have completed, or yes, absolutely.
So do we feel we've answered that first part of the question, Julia?
I think so. And actually that was sort of the end of it. And I will say this too. I think you're correct, Mark. This information is readily available. I have actually so UMass is a good example for my students. Well, UMass is pretty clear about who might get the honors college. I am sort of unable to predict for Milton students. They don't have a GPA. And so there are students that I'm not at all surprised got the honors colleges. And then there are some years and I'm like, really, how did this student not get that? So I will say I've actually followed up with the college afterwards because I knew the student was interested and it really would I did have one student, for example, who only wanted to go to UMass if the honors college was an option, because the way it was structured is exactly what the student was looking for at a larger university. And he had a career aspiration that dovetailed perfectly with a public university. So he did not get it, even though I'm shocked. And so when we called and followed up, I did find out as to why that student didn't get it. And in this case, it was because the school knew the student would never go and would likely get into, I will say this, the student was a big development case and legacy at Ivy League schools and had the grades to get in, right? So I think that they were like, why should we kind of waste a spot on this kid? And it is true, the student did get into Ivy League schools in the regular round. So
one thing I should say also, I don't want to make it sound like it's so simplistic that just look at the profile and you're going to know, because one of the things that is so prevalent, and particularly at larger universities, is the role that the major or the school plays in admission. And that tends to not be on those profiles. That they don't tend to break it down on that level. And so there still can be some ambiguity as to, am I going to be a competitive applicant? That's why for those kinds of schools, it is nice to ask. They'll generally tell you, like, what are your more competitive majors? Right. And, or if you're working with a counselor, they can help you.
And this is a great example because this student wanted to be in the School of Business, which was already a very competitive school at UMass. And so therefore the amount of spaces they have in the honors college that is actually for the more selective colleges in the university is very different than if a student was applying to arts and sciences, for example. So I do want to say that if, especially actually I have found, I don't know about you, Mark, but for public institutions that have an early action round, if there is still, you can call and ask for reconsideration for the honors college if you were admitted in an early action round. And so I've done that for a couple students because they're like, well, I got this good news and like, I'm not sure where I'm going to be going, but if I have a chance. And so actually almost always if it's an invite process for the college, then I've been successful in talking to someone there where they would reconsider the student for honors college distinction.
All right. So where do we want to go next? Because this is a multi-layered question.
Yeah. So which is actually, it's a good segue, I think, because the other part of the question was how, let's say the college is it is by an invite only. So, and by this we mean, like we said, it's all different at each school, but a lot of honors colleges, when you go to apply to the college, will have either a part of that initial application process or an additional application process to apply to the honors college. So like, as Mark said, most likely this is like an extra essay. Kudos to the schools, by the way. I love the schools that just let you check a box that you're interested. I love that. UMass used to do that with the honors college. You could just check the box if you're interested. But I find most often it is usually, would you like to apply? It's a drop down on your Common App. Would you like to apply to the honors college? And when you select yes, either 1 to maybe 2 essays populate. One of my favorite honors colleges out there is actually University of Pittsburgh. And the way they do it is you actually need to go to a different site to then complete their honors college essay and then submit that in a different place than the Common App. And I think they do that so they know that you're really intentional about applying to. So invite only schools are ones where you're not going to do an extra application step, an extra essay. It is that once you apply and they deem, that you are, your profile fits that of someone they'd like to offer the honors college to. Assaf was asking how, in that situation where it's invite only, how could you indicate to the college that you would like to attend for the honors college? I'm curious your thoughts on this, Mark, but usually if there is no way to indicate, that's because they're not looking for that. And if in the case that I just talked about, where I did have a student that was really interested in that and didn't get it, it did work out for that student that, or another student I had rather, that after we called and inquired, they were like, oh, okay, all right, the student's interested. They reconsidered them and they did admit the student to the honors college, and they saw it as a yield option for the student. But by and large, I would find that since it happens mostly at public universities, it happens at places that do not measure demonstrated interest, that there is no real way for you to indicate that you're interested in the honors college, nor is the college looking for you to indicate that. And in fact, I don't think it probably lands well on colleges if you're to say, I'm interested in your school, but really only if I have the honors college, or like I would be most interested if I had the honors college. So it doesn't play well to either side. And so I don't know if you have different thoughts, Mark, but.
No, I agree 100%. The only thing that I wasn't crystal clear on in the question was when it was how do I indicate interest. I wasn't quite sure if that was more of a mechanical question, like how would I let them know I'm interested, and that's really straightforward by the school. The school, and different schools do have different processes. There are some that auto-admit right into their honors college without any additional work. Those tend to be some of those box checkers, and they'll let you know. Very similar to schools that do, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but there's schools that do like scholarship day or scholarship weekend. And originally you just do the normal application, and then they flag and earmark people that are in the top whatever, maybe the top 10th of the applicant pool, and then you get a special invitation. So some schools are set up that way. So I just wasn't sure if the question was more like along the mechanics of how would I let a school know I'm interested, and it will be crystal clear, like we've already said, if you just read the fine print there on that, or if it was more what you were talking about, Julia, which how can I convey my demonstrated interest to increase my chances? And yeah, that doesn't work for the reasons that you said. These are not schools that tend to do the sophisticated third party, companies that come up with a percentage chance of you coming and use all the sophisticated metrics. It doesn't mean that they don't use some of them. I talked a little bit about that in my interview that's still airing right now with Don Hossler and Stephen Burd on enrollment management. Don was a vice provost at IU, and he's seen the growth of demonstrated interest in the publics. And so I don't want to just completely make it sound like it's a non-factor at all. But in general, though, I agree with you. It wouldn't land well if they thought you were only interested in them if you got in the honors college. And they're going to have their profile of who's competitive.
Right.
And you either meet it or you don't.
Or you don't.
And
right.
They're going to have their criteria and maybe how good your essays are, or if there's an interview, or what your recs are, as well as how strong your overall application is. And they'll take into consideration a lot of things, including, things like maybe your area of study and your area of interest, as well as all the other similar factors that admission officers look at, from your personal qualities to your extracurricular impact to your, fit to major, to your compositional diversity needs that you may be bringing in, helping the institution. And that I use that in the broadest sense. From full pay to Pell to geographic to gender to international to all of those things.
Right.
Tends not to be as much on the full pay, because a lot of those public schools are not need aware or need conscious. They're just admitting, and they'll either gap you, or you can either pay or not pay, as opposed to saying, oh, this person can pay, so extra asterisk beside them. Although there's no doubt in my mind we're going to see more and more and more of that, as schools struggle with enrollment cliff, demographic cliff, all the stuff that they're going through now. You're seeing the merging of the public to the private, the public having to do more marketing the way the privates do, and think more in terms as their state budgets get cut. And so over the next 10, 15, 20 years, I think you'll see more and more and more of the things we see in the private school will trickle into the public schools, just if for any other reason, just for survival.
Right. I know. And we also, it's rare, but we do see in some private colleges that they incentivize maybe the early decision round with the promise that you would, if you meet a certain threshold, you will get the honors college, right? It's rare, but I do agree with you. I think we'll see more incentivizing and more reliance on other factors to really rely heavily on the marketing side of honors colleges.
Yes. I think, have we answered all the questions, Julia? Do you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Great question. I think all of us on our team are big fans of honors colleges. I wouldn't say that it absolutely replicates the exact same culture as the small liberal arts and science school. They are different, but it comes with lots of advantages too. Because you get the benefit of the bigger environment and more courses and more choices of people and big sports and things like that oftentimes people are looking for. So I love it when people look at honors colleges, and I wish more people would. So love this question. Okay, friends, I hope you've enjoyed our roundtable, because all good things must come to an end. This is the last of our segment, at least related to the Common App. And we will answer a question from an anonymous listener, a few questions, and then we'll have a pretty detailed conversation around tips when it comes to college resumes. And if you enjoy this format, let us know, and we'll see if we can do it again. Listen and enjoy. All right, our last question comes from Anonymous Mom, and she has 3 questions.
Hi, I'm a mom of a rising senior from New York, and I have a couple of questions for your upcoming podcast about the honors and awards section. So I'm just going to go ahead and list them here for you. First, can awards for sports be included? If not, where should these be included in the application? 2, can awards for arts or music be included if my child takes this as a class in school and the award comes from the school? 3rd, what order should I put the honors and awards? Chronologically? Most significant? Any other way? 4, does National Honor Society count as an award? What about Spanish National Honor Society? And last, what if my child does not have a lot of academic awards? She has focused more on sports, so her awards are more in this realm. Will this limit my child's college options? Thanks for everything that you do on your podcast to unravel the mystery that is college admissions.
Vince is like, he's cracking his knuckles. He's like ready for this.
Yes. So I think those are great questions. I would say in terms of sports, I think there's a lot of space, and you don't want to describe how you play tennis. So I'd love to see if you're all CIF or all league or whatever it is I would put that in activities. Arts and music is a major, so I think it's fair game. You can put it in a section, but as the group has said, I will tell you, in my experience, having read thousands of applications, nobody is penalized for putting, sports over in the honor section. And then I would say, I think it's important that you start from like your activities from the most important. So if you're an Entel or Siemens or whatever they call it, finalist, and they pick 300 in the world, that probably should lead the pack. That people will notice. Your National Honor Society, where like 200,000 students are in National Honor Society. But if that's your one, put it on there. But I think it should go from strongest or biggest impact to least impact. And again, and I've had those students who they go to schools or they're very competitive and they're always entering something. If you have more than 5, give me 5. If you're a debater, I don't need to see 22 awards. Maybe you tell me you won 22 National Debate Awards and then list the biggest one, but don't feel like you want to use all your space for listing awards that really the reader won't know what they mean. And so you want to lead with impact.
I see a lot of head nodding.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And especially for the sports awards, like you likely, if you've gotten a sports award, that will show up in your activity section. So sometimes I really like seeing, as Vince said, I don't need you to explain that tennis is a sport played with 2 rackets and a ball. But like say you've got like the coaches award, which is awarded to a student who demonstrates X, Y, and Z. That would be great to have in your activity section, but not bad at all if you put it in the honors section. And then a lot of, I agree with Vince very much on the music and the arts piece. To me, those are academic honors. But some awards, also those distinctions do come with an academic component, like All-American, or in your conference that not only were you an impact player, but you maintained a certain grade point average or something. So
scholar athlete.
Yeah. So I think it's not ever inappropriate sometimes to put that in the honor section, especially if there is an academic piece tied to that sports award.
I asked my husband about this question because he was a pretty serious high school athlete who was second team All-State for football in Ohio, which is pretty hard. Ohio is a competitive place for football.
Some football players there.
And I told him, really need to see that in the honors section because I can't get enough context. I don't really understand what it means. I said, were you the hardest working person on your team? And he's like, yeah, I was the hardest working person. And then he told me all the ways that he was the hardest working person on his team. And I was like, well, then that needs to be fleshed out somewhere, right? If that's the thing that you're proud of, that you showed up early and left late and, started lifting in 8th grade so that you could make varsity your freshman year. Like, I want to know that, but I'm not going to see all that from what's in your honors section. So you need to find a way to say it in the activity section or have your counselor flesh it out or something so that you can get sort of the full benefit of telling me about that award.
Have any of you read at places that allowed for a resume upload? I know that's a choice schools have.
You have a resume upload.
You have a resume upload? Okay. what are your thoughts on some of this stuff going there, in an award section or something on the resume? Do you feel like, yeah, it'd be good to add it there? That's what resumes are partly for, or we just look at that thing so quickly I might miss it. I mean, what are your thoughts on, of all the things we've talked about? This is kind of a summary thing. It's our last question a listener sent in. Which of the things that have been sent in would you say, the resume is also a place for that to go?
Well, some resumes are specific. The college asks for a specific type of resume, and that's something that kids often don't spot, that in some cases it will be academic. In some cases it will say activities. Of course, we won't even talk about the University of Texas at Austin, which is like everything you've done in your waking hours. 6 pages is not too short, or not too long, I should say. But I think, first of all, look and see if the college is asking you for a type of resume. If they just say optional resume upload, then the student has to think about how that's going to add value. So if they can focus on an area of interest and expertise, like debate, Vince mentioned debate, that's a great example, and really unpack that in a detailed way. A debate resume is a great way to do that. I think you have to think that the Common App is a giant resume to begin with, right? So, and you've got a lot of moving pieces in the Common App, a lot of places to put information, that a general resume may not add any value, but a resume focused on, a specific talent or interest or academic endeavor. One of my favorite resumes, this goes way back to Mark when we were in school together, was a student who was a naturalist, and she was interested in studying environmental studies, but she was a real naturalist, and she used her resume to chronicle kind of all the natural, the kind of field biology, ecology studies she had done on her own. And her resume was basically my experience, self-initiated natural history. I don't think it was natural history, but you get the idea, field biology research. And it was just everything she did for herself. And it was robust. It was amazing. And she was like, "Oh, do you think this is interesting?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." So it was so focused and so particular to her. It spoke volumes, I thought, to readers. So things like that. Some theater kids, of course, can expand on their roles and engagement. I love those kinds of resumes. I think they add a lot of value.
Yeah, because you're learning something.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, you're learning something that you're not going to learn through the rest of the application. Hillary, what you're currently receiving resumes. What do you like and not like in a resume?
I've been trying to sort of put my finger on what it is about the ones that make a difference. Like, why do they make a difference? And I think sometimes it's just the way that students group different activities or group different honors, that they have a little more flexibility in how to describe those activities or honors. Because I would say out of 100 resumes, there is normally I see like 2 that actually make a difference for me and make me sometimes go back into the application to see if I can match up what I'm seeing on the resume and try to get the fullest possible picture. So, most of the time they're not all that helpful because it's just repeated information, but sometimes it's just having information in a different order or expanding on it differently that makes an impact.
Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what everyone said. And I love that if you combine sometimes for what Vince was mentioning about how you might have a lot of awards in a particular area and they might not fit there. And I know that some of my students, even though I think I know that they'll still be a compelling applicant without listing all of those, it gives them a little peace of mind to have listed it elsewhere. And it is additive, right? They're not just listing it to list it. And then combined with what Susan and Hillary are saying about how it then fleshes out a little more about how that commitment or that interest, that it can be a win-win situation. It's fine if your admission officer doesn't read it because they've likely gotten the gist of where your strength is and your passions are. But I also feel like it serves the student well, and they feel like, okay, I did get a chance to say everything I wanted to say or list everything I wanted to.
I would just say when you're doing the resume, you want to make sure, though, that the amount of time you're doing something is the same.
Consistency.
The consistency, amount of time spent per week or, per year, hours per week, all of that should match. And when it doesn't match, then there's a question raised, because you do have people who can track that information. I was not one of the readers who was like, matching, resources, or sometimes looking at what the counselor said and did the students say they had the same activities. But I think that that's important. But also, I remember when we were doing the activity section, a few months ago, that it's not required that the admissions person has to read the resume. So if you think you're putting some nugget of gold in there or diamond and it's not in your Common App, don't expect someone to suddenly find out something that should have been in your Common App. So make sure your Common App is the front piece, and then the resume is just additive.
Is there anything we haven't discussed about the honor section that we feel we'd be remiss to close out and not address? We've gone the questions were pretty comprehensive. They provided a good framework for us to pretty much tackle, I think, the most commonly asked questions that I can think of, but I thought I'd throw that out there. Is there anything we haven't said that any one of you would like to say as we wind down? Mm-hmm.
Just that there's 100 characters in that space, and you use it all. So don't assume that somebody knows what, some random, new award or recognition, what it is. You have some space to tell us what it is.
Yeah, spell it out. Don't use abbreviations. That was another thing Karen wanted me to say. Don't use abbreviations on your awards.
Yes, I'm the winner of the XPRU 4319. Mark, I would really want parents not to feel like these are unimportant. I think as readers, we all see so much of this. It's not that we are dismissive of them. We truly respect the fact that students have achieved. And we understand that achievement is measured and recognized in lots of different ways. And I would never want a parent to go away from this recording to feel that we're being dismissive. But there's no doubt that information that is shared in context qualitatively carries a lot of weight. Much more so, I think, than lists of anything, truthfully, in the application. That context and detail is so incredibly helpful to readers.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why the honors section isn't top of mind for most important, because it's not very long. And so it doesn't really leave room for a lot of reflection and answering the why questions and things like that. It tends to be more almost like lists because it is so short. Obviously there are exceptions. Vince pointed out a few exceptions in some of his examples, but that's a good point. Well, I hope one takeaway everyone has is, go back to a book that when I was back in sales, my sales manager gave me for Christmas. Don't sweat the small stuff. I hope that people will feel reduced stress about this section, and know that it's rarely dispositive. It's rarely what moves the needle in terms of getting in and not getting in, and hopefully just that alone will help you. So thank you guys for joining me. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate you guys so much. And this is a lot of fun. We're all admissions nerds and geeks, and we all we blow up each other's phones all day with our, we have text message groups, but it's nice to see everybody's face and begin to chat with you guys here. So thank you so much for giving up an hour and a half of your valuable time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I hope you're enjoying my interview with Stephen Burd and Don Hossler as much as I enjoyed actually conducting it. And it's time for the final part. So in part 3 of 3, Stephen and Don talk about some firms and how they leverage financial aid for every single student. And Don uses the word repulsive when referring to this practice. And he explains what he means. Don tells us a story about a dastardly thing he once heard one of the bigger firms say in an admissions conference. I asked Don another tough question about financial aid leveraging, and he lets us know if he finds this practice ethical or unethical. I asked Don if he feels colleges tracking your web activity and factoring that into admissions decision, is that ethical or unethical in his opinion? And remember, Don was a vice provost for Enrollment Management. Don tells us whether more public universities are using demonstrated interest, more so than families are aware of. Stephen talks about another practice he finds to be unethical when it comes to recruitment. Don talks about a director of admission that got fired because the president intentionally wanted the director to recruit to reject, and the director said, I refuse to do that. Stephen talks about how all of this financial aid leveraging is actually hurting, not helping colleges financially. Stephen tells us who he feels is really being hurt by all of this financial aid leveraging. And finally, Stephen and Don go on the hot seat. Listen and enjoy. Do you think it's fair to take all of the firms and do one broad stroke with the brush? Because I think there's differences within there as well.
I would say the major firms, the biggest firms, and I really am talking about EAB and Noel Levitt. Right. I'm not trying to talk about every firm.
Yeah, because I don't want to sing the praises of this group too much, and Don, you can correct me, but human capital management is a one that several people I know use, and what I've been told
about them, is that Brian?
Yeah, what I've been told is their price is so much lower than a few of the ones you referenced, and I've had demoed the incredible amount of research that they produce, and I'll tell you what, I was ready to sign up right then if I was a VP of enrollment. I was like, oh my goodness, you're going to give me this level of information? It was incredible. And then I'm told they do it at a good price.
I used to, as a reporter, I used to talk to Brian Zucker. I think his name is Zucker. Always one of the best, but they're a smaller firm. What I'm talking about are the giant firms. And
you're talking about stuff like EAB that makes you use their software, and therefore you have to spend a tremendous amount and be locked into their system.
You're locked into their system.
And you talked about in the book how they've taken over they've taken over CapEx, and now they're competing to generate their own stream of lead management and locking you into their system.
And they're also encouraging colleges to leverage all of their aid. And that is a huge thing, because at that point, you're gapping, that leaves you with no choice but to gap the lowest income.
Well, yes, some of these firms claim that they will optimize the package for every individual student. I find that repulsive.
And so that's really who I'm talking about. I'm not trying to say that there isn't the possibility for better firms, but they just don't have the same kind of incentive structure, because they are purely capitalistic, as you say. So,
but there can be capitalism with the conscience. There can be someone that believes in making money and still doing
But EAB is owned by private equity.
I know.
And private equity usually is not, the words conscience and private equity usually don't go together.
I'm not talking about EAB or RNL.
Yeah. So I will I'm not trying to go after Brian or human capital.
Several years ago at a conference, I saw one of the vice presidents of RNL basically tell the audience, that they ought to have two different list prices, a lower one on the admissions site, and the actual cost on the financial aid site, because most people didn't look at the financial aid site, and they would remain more interested in the college because the price looked lower on the admission site.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot of unsavory practices. I want to ask you about another thing, if you think of this as an ethical dilemma, Don. This gets into financial aid leveraging. So some colleges are looking at, and you talk about this in the book, you talk about, people like Capture Higher Ed and RNL and how they're tracking every single footprint on the website and how long you spend there, and then using algorithmic models, which I know human capital does some of that too, but that's not the question I'm going with here. Some of them turn around and say, this person has demonstrated so much interest that we're going to give them less money because we think they're going to come without a bigger tuition, incentive. So once again, completely divorcing the concept of money from either need or merit, really. It's just, hey, why would we give this person a lot of money if we think they're eager beaver? And we'll give them $3,000 because we want little Johnny to be able to tell his Aunt Bertha that he got a merit scholarship and feel good. But we really would have given him 10, but we think he'll come for 3. One, would you confirm that does go on? And do you feel that's an unsavory practice?
Yeah, I mean, that falls into my bucket of having an individualized aid package, for a truly individualized package for each person. But it's intrigued with the ambiguities of life. It's part of who I am. So I'm not bothered by the fact that I used to have these spreadsheets that would generally say, oh, I'm just going to make this up, that an out-of-state student, and we never tried to break it down by whether the student was from New Jersey or Chicago or something, but an out-of-state student with a 3.3 GPA and an 1100 SAT and a family, we were guessing the family income probably fell somewhere around $95,000, that for all of those students, we would decide that a merit aid offer of about $3,000 would increase the yield amongst that group by 12%. Keeping in mind that you don't know which of those students are going to be the 12%, so that everybody who maybe was only going to get $2,000, they're all going to get $3,000 now, knowing we've spent more overall as the group, but because of that 12% increase, we will see a modest increase in net tuition revenue. That kind of group thing didn't bother me, but it would bother me a lot. It would bother me a lot to really get to the point where we were that every single student we had so much data on that we were crafting an individual aid package.
And Don, you're talking about what bothered you was the not crafting the individual aid package based on merit, but are you talking about crafting the aid package on what we think we needed to give them in order for them to come?
If we wanted to increase our yield by 12% among that group, yes. How much additional financial aid would it take to increase, on average, the yield amongst students in that group by 12%? And again, remember, my cynical side, I'm looking at the other end of this. It's probably a parent who his son didn't get into the University of Illinois, and would rather have an IU degree than an Illinois State degree. And just like Steve said earlier, wants to be able to go to a cocktail party and flap his tie a little and talk about the scholarship his son got.
Yeah, I know. So what do you want parents to know about this process? 90% of our audience is parents, 10% are college counselors. We don't have a whole lot of students. Students listen to a segment here or there, but they're not usually, we can't compete with TikTok. We're too long for that. But what do you want a parent to know? I mean, I know you want people to be educated consumers. What should be the takeaways for a parent listening to all this, how the sausage is made? I once was talking I was on the school side. I used to work at KIP, Charter School Network. And I was going into some of this stuff with an assistant principal, and she literally put her fingers in her ears and said, I don't want to hear any more about how the sausage is made. This is very icky.
It can be icky. Did you want to take that, Don? Or
well, I'll just say, no, I'm probably on a continuum about the privacy of my data. I'm probably at the more extreme end, because I'll just say, for example, the school, University of Wisconsin Stout, that was using that software.
Yes.
If they had a statement that, be aware, we track your movements on our website, then I would have no ethical problem with it. Because for me, it's the whole business of. So one of the things I want parents to know is institutions anymore know a whole lot about you, your son or daughter, and your family. You should know they know enough that it might actually bother your privacy concerns.
Sure.
So be aware how much they know, and that they are using they are going to use that information to try to influence your behaviors and your son or daughter's behavior. And just like Steve's talking about a woman he was dating, don't get all wrapped up in how wonderful it is that my son or daughter who has a 3.5 and they took the SAT and they got a 1200, that they're not a genius.
I don't know if we want to tell parents that their kids are.
And they're giving you that money to try to get you to decide to send your child here. That's what it's all about. Not how great your daughter is.
So, Don, there are not that many colleges that if you say to them, do you use demonstrated interest? Say, yeah, we use demonstrated interest. I mean, I've seen more of that than I used to, but I still see a lot of people that say, no, we don't look at interest. And on the private side, they've got 2 rounds of early decision with very differential ED admit rates. It's obvious they use interest. Are you seeing the growth of demonstrated interest on the public side?
Yeah, I think so, but not always. I was just thinking, I never thought of this as demonstrated interest. In terms of, so one of the ways I tried to make sure I was included in all the important meetings so that decisions weren't made about my life that were unrealistic and that I couldn't possibly fulfill. So one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to have a better idea of what our entering class was going to be sooner than anybody else, because then I got invited to the meetings that could affect my life. It was just as pure and simple as that. I don't want some dean bringing up a dumb idea, and people who don't know much about this say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's tell Don to do that. So this is demonstrated interest. I could tell you how the yield rate varied, the final year rate varied by the date in which they first expressed interest in the campus.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that. I've tried to bring that up to families. I'm torn about doing that because I don't want to breed this insanity that I need to start doing everything in the 9th grade. But I had a school say to me, one of the best predictors we have of yield is, has the student been engaged with us since the 9th grade?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we used to say if they or even if they, because you could actually apply to IU you had to wait till your final senior grade, but you could apply in the spring of your junior year. Our yield amongst kids who applied that early was terrific. So I guess in a way that was a form of demonstrated interest. Again, I think the question becomes, in terms of the ethics of it, is how far do they drill down on that? Are they using it to actually give someone less money? But yeah, no, I'm absolutely certain more schools are using demonstrated interest because the consultants are building it into their models.
And Slate, you want to say a little bit about Slate? You talked about Slate in the book. I mean, Slate has ability to track all of these metrics too and produce these really sophisticated reports. There's no doubt in my mind that you have people building models out that say, look, if this person has been engaged since a long time and they are spending time on the enrollment page and they're looking at costs and tuition and all that, you know, we're going to bump up their algorithm score of their chances of coming. And so when people hear that, they think, you know what? My kid is busy. I'm a mom. I'll use the same computer they use, so you can the same IP address, and I'll go hang out and bump around and spend time on the enrollment page or the deposit page and all that to signal to the school that I'm serious. That's what it almost inevitably leads to, those kind of behaviors on the part of parents.
Well, because the other effect it can have is it's totally separate from financial aid. It can increase in more selective schools, then it can increase the odds your son or daughter is going to get admitted.
Of course.
Because yield rates, or at least used to matter in rankings.
So even, the interesting thing is, even that U.S. News has moved away from putting yield in rankings since about 2018. It's my experience that people actually look at acceptance rate even more than rankings. And part of that is the glut of rankings has now created a certain amount of confusion. But people want the status of being able to say they got in a real low admit rate school. So it still ends up fueling the same thing, like why waste admits on people we don't think are coming?
And again, in all sectors, there's questionable things. Steve and I were talking the other day, and Steve went to Swarthmore. Steve, I didn't tell you this, but I told you I was at that meeting of highly selective small college presidents.
Right.
The Swarthmore presidents said they had 13 different early decision dates.
Oh my God!
And I was saying, holy shit! How could any middle income or low income kid have the slightest idea about 13 different dates? Now, this was a long time ago, so I have no idea what it is now. But I was blown away when they said we have 13 different ED dates.
That was one of the best chapters in Salingo's book, was about Tulane and the different early decisions that they have. And I'm a parent. My daughter was looking at colleges this past year, and just trying to figure out all the different early decisions was a challenge.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 453 are a few different TED Talks, and they're both done by Julie Lythcott-Haims. Now, Julie Lythcott-Haims is a former director of admission at Stanford University, but she's more famous as just an advocate for healthy parenting. And she did a TED Talk, and I've put the link in the show notes, but I'll give you the name. It's up on YouTube. It's had almost 4 million views, and it's called How to Raise Successful Kids Without Over-Parenting. We featured her book on the same topic before on the podcast for recommended resource. But if you don't have time for the book, this is a 14-minute TED Talk, which is fantastic. I've watched it a few times. And more recently, she did another one. It's a 19-minute one, also on YouTube. And it's called That Tough But Necessary Conversation with Parents. So a recommended resource for episode 453, a couple TED Talks by Julie Lythcott-Haims. Now return to our interview. So we're about to transition to our lightning round. I call it our hot seat. We do it with every first-time guest. It's non-admission stuff. But before we do, anything either one of you want to share that we haven't brought up that you feel is important?
Well, one of the other things that I would say to parents too, and then one of the things that I think is fairly unethical that has to do with the acceptance rates, is just how much material you get from the institutions and how much of it sounds like they really want your kid.
Sure.
I was able to tell my daughter, just ignore all this stuff. It doesn't really mean anything. But I do think that it's pretty cynical to some of the tactics that are used to get students to apply, so that they can be rejected, so that the acceptance rate can fall. I think we're dealing with appealing to 18-year-old. I mean, not all college students are 18-year-olds, but these things tend to be aimed at 18-year-olds.
Well, a lot of them start early. You take a AP or a PSAT in the 10th grade, and
it's unsophisticated.
They create a whole campaign, and you're starting to get stuff at 16.
And they're unsophisticated, and I think raising the expectations or hopes of students and then dashing them, I just think it's somewhat immoral. So it's not. I really hate that practice.
I have a friend who's retired now. He got fired he wasn't the enrollment manager, he was director of admissions at the University of Illinois. The president wanted them to provide less information about what it took to get admitted so that they could get more applications and reject them. And he refused to do that, and he got fired.
Yeah, I think the pressure on some people to drive down the admit rate is enormous. I mean, you talk about in your book, you talked about Virginia Commonwealth, VCU getting a $25,000 bonus, if you could move into a certain tier. So whether it's financial incentives or whether it's job security, you guys are both probably familiar with John Bockenstedt.
Yeah.
Very outspoken. We've had him on the podcast before, formerly at DePaul, now at Oregon State. I was just reading, he's very active on Twitter, and just put a notice out that said 45 openings for VPs of enrollments just from one firm alone. I've never seen that many in my life.
Amazing.
I mean, it's just, it's a turnstile out there. And I know when I get a chance to talk to people off the record, I mean, the pressure that they feel they're under is just enormous.
Yeah.
I talked to one not too long ago, and I asked her what pressure she's felt to improve the rankings. And she said, I've been at 5 institutions. I felt the pressure at all 5.
I was talking to an old-time financial aid administrator who's not at her institution anymore, which is a private college in Massachusetts. And she said every year it was a new person. Every year. Nobody ever meets their, and then it's try this, try another one. Another thing, just before we get to the lightning round, we talked about using enrollment management to keep the lights on, but we didn't talk about how sometimes all of this discounting and financial aid leveraging is actually putting the lights out because of the discount rate just going up and up and up. And I think that we may be getting to the other side of this where it's becoming so counterproductive for a number of poorer schools that we're going to see more of that.
And that's also coupled with all the races out there too, right? So your competitors build new dorms, so you need to build new dorms. And then they have new student centers, and then you need the student centers. And then the merit aid and we need to beef up our career centers and our mental health support and our advising. I mean, some things are good, student affairs, but they come with a price tag.
Yeah. A lot of catering to the wealthier students. I mean, I miss the days when I went to college where, and I didn't go, I'm not that old, but where the dorms, you having like not the greatest dorm was kind of part of the charm of it all. And,
it's a tough sell. As someone on the counseling side, these kids don't want corridor traditional style dorms anymore. They really don't. You give them the Four Seasons and they don't want to go to Motel 6 anymore. It's
Right.
That's just human nature. And the other sad thing, and I respect so highly your passion for under-resourced kids, Stephen, as somebody who worked at an access organization for almost 14 years. And the whole time I've been doing this, I've been very much involved in the cause of trying to bridge the knowledge gap. That's what this podcast is about. Our motto is making college knowledge available to all. But there's just not an appetite out there, I don't find, for like helping the under-resourced. I don't see the appetite. It's the same reason why you don't hear politicians talk about that. You'll hear the term middle class all the time. People, they want what's going to help their kid.
Right.
There's some people, very enlightened people, that see value to every type of kid around the table and in the dorm and in the dining rooms, and that will create the better learning laboratory. And if that means I need to pay a little more to have that representation there, I'm willing to do it. But, people are under a lot of pressure right now because that cost has been passed on to them. And one of the things I find conflicting is merit aid, because there's one sum of money. If you're giving to merit, you're decreasing from need. But on the other hand, the amount of money that a family is expected to pay for college is ridiculous. So that's how I'm at peace with it for that reason.
I agree with you, except that the other side of that we haven't really talked about, and that's important to know, is that when you're discounting, you're raising the top price. And so part of the financial aid leveraging enrollment management is actually making college more expensive. So it is like putting everyone into this bind and so it isn't really about helping the middle class. First of all, the people who benefit the most from financial aid leveraging are the wealthy, not the middle class.
Sure.
And the middle class, if you actually look at the data, and this is going back to the Chetty data that was released, a while
Chetty's
ago,
great.
The middle class did not do so much better than they were also dropping, I believe, in numbers. So I actually believe that enrollment management, financial aid leveraging is hurting the middle class as well as lower income. But we kind of go with this myth that merit aid, where we sort of pit low income need-based aid versus, and that the middle class is benefiting from merit aid, but they're really not the ones who are getting the benefiting as much.
Don, any final comments for you before we get off? You're good? All right, here we go. A few non-college admission stuff. So you can't do anything in education, but you have to have a different career. And for you, journalism, Stephen. What else would be kind of appealing to you?
Oh, besides journalism?
Besides journalism or education?
I think psychology. I'm very interested in how people process things, how people interact.
Do we have a future career as a clinical psychologist over here for Stephen?
Well, I'm sort of like, I probably should have done that for the money, So, the problem was I've always been for the underdogs. Man.
There you go. Hey, someone needs to advocate for them. The well-resourced have plenty of powerful attorneys and others advocating for them. Awesome. So what would you tell your 18-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
Are you talking to Don or to me?
We'll start with Don. You can think about your answer, Stephen.
Think about a wider array of colleges that I did at the time I was doing. Although I had a great time in college, but I realized how unaware I was of, my parents were both first-generation college students. And they offered me very, very little guidance. So I would tell myself to consider a wider array of colleges than I did at the time. Yeah, I don't know. That's about the only thing I can think of right at the moment.
Stephen, anything for you?
I'm not quite sure. I think that when I was 18, there might be part of me that would say, like, you might want to make a little bit more money. Like I was very much. I come from a really wealthy suburb, so I was always kind of a little bit rebellious. And I remember when.
Were you coming from the main line from Greater Philly, or where are you coming from?
Now from Fairfield County in Connecticut.
Yeah. Sure.
And I remember I was working, I had a part-time job at the library, and this guy came up to me and he asked me what I wanted to be, and I said I wanted to be a journalist, and he's like, "That's good, but there's no money. There's no money in that." And I said, "That's the point, you know." Right. And now I'm kind of like, well, a little more money would have been nice. I might have warned myself about where journalism was going, but yeah.
I appreciate the transparency.
I've been very lucky. I've had a very fulfilling career, and I really do love the stuff that I write about. So,
last question: how do you relax? How do you unwind? Had a hobby or guilty pleasure or anything you want to share?
I'll give it to Don first.
Spend time with friends. Although I've got a bad back now, so travel is not the option. What was? So I would have said traveling and reading books.
There you go. True intellectual, true former faculty member here.
Oh, they're not all intellectual books.
Oh, what do you read? Nonfiction?
I usually have one nonfiction going. Actually, I am listening to one on the Cold War, but I always have a mystery going too.
I thought you just read books about enrollment management.
What about you, Stephen?
Going out with friends, eating out, reading. I do really like to read too, and lots of streaming.
Awesome, great. So listen, any chance that the book is going to become an audiobook? Because there's a lot of our listeners are audiobook people. I've converted to one as well.
I'm not sure how many edited volumes become, audiobooks, but right. I can do everybody's voices, so I could. But right. I don't see that happening. There is a weird thing. I was telling Don this somehow. Maybe I can warn listeners, but there's a scam copy of my book on Amazon.
Really?
Yeah, it's like $10 less, and all you get the front page, the real front page, but then it's 100 pages of just a notebook.
Isn't that something that Harvard Press wants to get a lawyer on?
So we've talked to Harvard Press. They've taken the first step and asked Amazon to take it down.
Right. So I guess we should say the book all this time. It's called Lifting the Veil of Enrollment Management: How a Powerful Industry is Limiting Social Mobility in American Higher Education. Stephen edited it. Don is one of the star authors, but there are plenty of other people in it. I'll tell you briefly. I honestly am not just saying this because I don't say things I don't believe. There are multiple chapters here that I thought were worth the price of the book. I love chapter 1, Reign and Ruin, The Rise of Enrollment Management. I really also liked, A View from the Inside. That was your chapter, Don. And then I really, really liked this chapter, Finding the Right Students, about the list business and enrollment management. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And then I'm not just saying this because you're here, Stephen, but The Dangerous Game of Financial Aid Leveraging. I honestly felt each one of those chapters was worth the price of the book. So thanks for your contribution to higher ed. And I appreciate you giving us an hour and a half of your time.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
All right. Take care.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Okay, friends, hope you heard the first part of Lisa and me breaking down the University of South Carolina in Columbia. It's a 3-parter, and it's time for part 2 of 3. Listen and enjoy. So let's talk a little about the application process and get into stats and some things. So, when you apply, they have an early action date, and a lot of people who are not from the Southeast, this surprises them, but October 15th is actually very common early action deadline for Southeastern schools. I mean, that's the early action deadline for South Carolina. That's the early action deadline for UNC. That's the early action deadline for, well, both Georgia and Georgia Tech have now gone to an in-state and an out-of-state, two different ones, but 10-15 in-state for Georgia Tech. You've got that for like in Florida and Texas recently. And so, it's kind of a growing trend. And I understand, because if you're getting a lot more applications, one way to handle them is to buy yourself an extra 15 days. So you have like a 10-1 deadline right away, and that's for early action. Now, they will tell you that there is not an admissions advantage to applying to early action, but there is a housing advantage, because like a lot of schools, you're gonna get notified much sooner if you apply by that 10-15 date, like almost 3 months sooner than the regular decision students are notified. So and it's first come, first serve on the housing. So that's kind of how they do that. And then they also have a 12-1 regular decision date. They have an 11-15 honors college deadline. And you do have to, on the application, it will say, are you interested in honors? And if you say yes, then you get 2 more questions, one on intellectual curiosity, then there's another one, and then you get a shorter 250-worder, on basically like why honors. And it's a separate process, and you find out later if you're into honors after, like, first you'd find out if you got into school, then later you would find out if you got into the honors program. And when you look at like the kind of the profile of who's admitted, it has changed. You can see they're getting more selective, and it's almost all coming from out of state, the increase in selectivity. And the other thing that's happening that's a big change in terms of their applicant pool is it is increasingly becoming like a lot more from the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So if you look back, like just even 3 years ago, I saw their breakdown of students by state 3 years ago versus now. And it was obviously South Carolina is the top, but for South Carolina, a lot of years would be like 57% and everybody else would be 50 or 43. This last year, it was 53% South Carolina, 47% the rest of the country. And they went from bringing in 6,100 to 6,500. So they added 400 students. But after South Carolina, North Carolina had double the next amount over any other state other than South Carolina. This last year, I don't know if you know this, Lisa, New Jersey passed North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Into second place.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So that just sort of shows the word is really out. And as someone who, I know 2 years ago, New Jersey was the biggest state we worked with. It's just very popular. Carolinas are super popular. And I get it, because I lived one state over in Pennsylvania, and you vacation there. That's where you go. You're going to Hilton Head. You're going to Myrtle Beach. You're going to the Outer Banks. That's where you go. So there's a comfort level there. So New Jersey is absolutely taken off. And if you're curious what the other states are that are up there for their top states, New York is on the rise. It's getting actually pretty close to North Carolina. And then Maryland and Virginia, those round out the top other states. Now, their academic profile has improved, like Lisa commented on, but it still takes a range of students. So they went from admitting 69% down to 65%. So they're still taking about 2 and 3. And I appreciate them being really transparent with their data. They have, marked, even precipitous difference between the profile of their in-state student and their out-of-state student. So, for example, on the ACT, it used to be 27 to 31 out of state. Now it's 28 to 32, middle 50%. Guess what it is for South Carolina residents? Their middle 50%. What do you think it would be, Lisa?
Maybe 27.
21 to 29.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the 7-point lower SAT for the in-state versus the out-of-state. And I know what someone's thinking, that's not fair. Well, they're funding the institution, and these institutions exist primarily for their own state. When I was at UNC and I sat down with them, they could not have been clearer that, like they said they don't really feel that bad about all the out-of-state students that they're denying because we exist primarily to serve our state. And, it's interesting how Carolina's set up because I went to Clemson not that long ago and they both told me the same thing, that there's not sort of this rigid, strict kind of UNC 82%, 18%, and now Georgia's gone to 80-20 and Georgia Tech 73. And there's not that rigidity there, but they kind of know where their bread is buttered, and they want to make sure that they at least stay majority South Carolina. And that's the same thing Clemson told me, and that's the same thing that, that USC told me. I talked with Owen about what, I'll say that later. So one of the things you think, well, of course your test score profile is way higher. You're just taking way more test optional. Well, they are, but they still had more submitters than non-submitters. So they had 56% submitters and 44% non-submitters. And one thing that impressed me is their admit rate for non-submitters and submitters was virtually the same, within 1 percentage point. So you don't see that a lot. So that's one indication that, you really can be test optional and get admitted. And by the way, for their merit scholarships, they are also test optional. They had their highest merit scholarship they give went to someone who didn't submit test scores this last year. Now when I say that, I don't want people to hear that as, oh, test scores don't matter at all. That's not how you should hear that. Still having strong scores will help your case. But you should just know that it's not an automatic deal breaker, that you can't be considered. You know what I mean? There's a difference between
right.
It helps, strong scores help you versus if you don't have them, don't even bother applying. So those are not the same. So I really want to kind of make that, that differentiation.
Yeah. Where I think at Clemson, it is more the latter. They might say they're test optional, but and Auburn too, I would say, is the other school that I don't know how really test optional they
Auburn
is
are. Pretty clear. I think Auburn has really been pretty transparent about the role of testing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously test optional is very different from place to place.
Which just makes it harder for people. I guess it gives us a job, but it makes it harder for people. Yeah.
It sure does. It sure does.
You had your story. I had my story that sort of encapsulated the school spirit. So Owen pulled out his phone. And it's on YouTube. You can check it out. But, they have this tradition at South Carolina. They have this absolutely massive pool. First of all, they have this crazy, ridiculous fitness center. And it's just humongous. It's, I don't want to quote me on this, but I thought they said over 200,000 square feet. It's huge. And has this massive pool. So they have this tradition anytime some major thing happens where the students jump in the pool. And, if you don't know this, they have replaced UConn as the dominant women's basketball team. I mean, they pack an 18,000 person gym for women's basketball, and they won the national championship this year. So he showed me the video of like all of the students diving in the pool, and you see them going in. At first, you see just a few dots, and then the whole thing, you can't even see water. But I think it just encapsulates kind of the free-spirited fun and sort of that you feel there. And they are so proud of their mascot, Cocky, which is he's a cartoon character of a gamecock, which is a rooster, and their Gamecocks is their moniker. Clemson is their big rivalry.
Yes.
And they have over 100 years of playing the Poinsettia Bowl.
It's a Palmetto Bowl.
A Palmetto Bowl. Sorry, by Palmetto Bowl.
Not Poinsettia. That's like Christmas.
You know something? My mom's Bermudian.
Mm-hmm.
And she just got back from Bermuda. She was going on and on and on and on about the poinsettias all the time. And so I reverted to that. Yeah, the Palmetto Bowl. So South Carolina is the Palmetto State. And thanks, Lisa. And they played the Palmetto Bowl for over 100 years. And they have this tradition where somebody in the engineering department makes a tiger, because Clemson, their mascot's the Tigers. It's like a 30-foot tiger, and then they burn it. They
burn it to the ground.
Yes, they burn it to the ground and rev everybody up. So, but they've just got some cool things. They've got the National Advocacy Center. National is headquartered there. And somehow they negotiated some deal where all the lawyers have to hire USC interns to work in the National Advocacy Center. So that's literally there right on campus, which is pretty cool. It's a pretty big fraternity school.
Yeah, it's like 30%, I think.
It's 30%. It's actually it depends on male versus female. So like for guys, it's closer to 1 in 3, and women, it's like closer to 1 in 5. But still, it's a lot of different fraternities to pick from, and they tend to all live in Greek Village there. So if that's kind of your scene, then there's a lot of opportunities. There's 30 places to eat, 30 different dining rooms. So it's definitely a big school, and it's close to the city. Like you're right by the cities, but it's still self-contained. All students have to live on campus first year. They really feel strongly about that. But most of the students will move off campus for second year on. Something like 27% live on campus after that first year. So the culture is to move off campus. And some of the real hot spots, Main Street, 5 Points, I kind of went in and explored all the places where students live. I like to do that when I do a visit and kind of do all that. But, a few more things about Columbia. It's interesting because they were calling it a college town when I was there. And
no,
I don't feel it's a college town.
No.
Because it's the state capital and they have 5 hospitals and they've got all these law firms. But that's great for students because the students get the jobs in the law firms. The financial students, they get the jobs in the wealth management firms there. But one of the reasons why they said that if they call it a college town is because there really aren't any other significant colleges in Columbia at all. So it's kind of like the game in town. But I think you and I agree, it doesn't really feel like a college town. Would you agree?
No,
Yeah.
like Clemson is a college town.
Yeah, there's nothing around there.
This is like the state capital, and there's a great college there.
Yes, I totally agree. UNC's a college town, Chapel Hill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Davidson. Now, Athens is a college town.
Yeah, but like NC State is again
in Raleigh.
There's there's the capital of the state, and there's also this great college there.
Yep, definitely. So walking across campus Owen told me it takes 25 minutes to do it, and I would believe that because I have a terrible sense of direction, and I did walk across campus. I got lost a couple times. Had to call on several people to help me.
Oh, you were a baby gamecock too.
Yeah. It's over 400 acres, but it's spread out. But it was so beautiful. I was just enjoying it. Now, I pressed Owen really hard on what are the biggest complaints some of the students, have of the school. And he said, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 is the parking. And I thought the parking was atrocious. Like, I constantly run into parking challenges, and you'll find students will talk about parking over and over again as a complaint because it's actually takes a lot of space if you're gonna provide transportation for a lot of people if they want to bring cars. But it was a bad parking experience for me, especially. I tend to be a little El Cheapo on it. I mean, in New York City, I expect to pay, but I'm in a place like that. I'm like, I got to be able to park for free. I'm visiting admissions. And I looked, and everywhere I went, it was metered or go in a garage. And I finally, they have that hotel, the graduate hotel right on campus there. It's really nice, actually. And I found one spot that wasn't being taken. And so I parked there. But everywhere you went, it was like, whoa, we will boot you. We will tow you. We will blah, blah. So I can see. But you know what? If your biggest complaint is parking, it's not too bad.
Mm-hmm.
Students complained about how far the stadium was away from the Cora campus. That was another thing. You were going to say something, Lisa?
Well, I do think South Carolina is experiencing some of the stuff that we experience here in North Carolina at the UNCs, which is there's a difference between the attitudes and values of maybe the professors and the faculty versus the board of directors. And there's conflict about that in South Carolina, as there is here in North Carolina. Things like about diversity and inclusion, and things like that. I think there's some tension around that. I know when we went, they just had a new president nominated, and he had, no university experience. He was a political nomination. People were very upset about that. So, I think there's just that kind of tension, which I think will be going on in public Southern schools for a while.
Yeah. And South Carolina traditionally has been a lot more conservative than North Carolina. And I do think overall that South Carolina is a lot more conservative than Chapel Hill. Like when I talk to students and say how many would be Trump supporters, it's around 50-50. And you would not get that at Chapel Hill.
No, you would not.
Yeah, so it is a different political climate there. But I could also see that they're wrestling with their segregationist past. Like, there's some things that, as a Black person, you kind of hard sometimes to stomach. Like Strom Thurmond, Strom Thurmond is just like, I just reflexively react to him because of the what he did in history, but he's still kind of like venerated, on that. But there's a big monument about, we ended segregation on our campus in 1963, and they kind of, you have that at Georgia as well. You sort of see that they're trying to go in a different direction a little bit. There are some DEI programs that are built into that first year experience. And Don Saley is like a god there. Like, she has a street named after her, So I do see them wrestling with their past, because they were, even within the South, like, they were not on the vanguard of Southern integration. Friends, this concludes the second part. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, Julia will join me, and we will be talking about, are there any topics that you should avoid completely when it comes to writing the personal statement? Listen on Monday, and we'll have that discussion. And then we'll also continue our interview with Jay Rosner, test prep pro and expert, who's grown to be rather cynical and critical on the ACT, the SAT, the more he learns. We'll listen to his rationale and reasoning for that. And friends, I will let you know that I just booked a session with Andy Strickler, who you may remember. Andy did a couple great segments for us about a half a year ago. This is on all things related to the athletic pre-read process. I'm actually doing that interview with Andy on the 12th of August, but I'm telling you now because if you have specific questions about how athletic pre-reads work at Division III schools, please go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and speak them into existence, and we'll play them and answer your questions when I do the recording. And friends, remember, your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.